frequent flyer programs for their own air mile accounts, and individuals can book to a destination further than the one they intended to fly to, and then
Good afternoon. President Suharto cut short his visit to Egypt. As he flies back, the protests in Indonesia turn to mob violence. More than 20 people have died in 3 days of violence.
President Clinton and Chancellor Kohl together for the celebrations in Berlin 50 years on after the airlift.
There was rioting for the third consecutive day in the Indonesian capital of Jakarta. Rioters have set fire to cars and shops, causing wide-scale damage in the city. President Suharto, speaking for the first time since the riots began, has said that he might be willing to stand down.
Banks and shops were still burning this morning after a third violent night of mob rule in Jakarta. Thousands of looters rampaged through the streets, leaving parts of the city looking like a war zone. Their main anger was being vented at the Chinese, who, even though only make up a small part of the 200 million population, own the bulk of the wealth. In the Chinese area of the city, 12 people died when the bar they were in was torched. Looters took away anything they could carry, while the security forces stood by and watched. When asked why the army appeared to be doing nothing, Colonel Timur replied,
"Our main priority is to the government, but we will get everything under control by whatever force is necessary."
Mobs attacked and damaged several buildings linked to firms owned or controlled by Indonesian President Suharto. They included a car showroom which was badly damaged by fire. Whether there's a fourth day of rioting remains to be seen.
And joining me now in the studio is our Foreign Affairs editor, Tony Dolce. Tony, what's the cause of the riots in Indonesia?
Well, Andrew, last year the Asian economic market collapsed, and Indonesia, being one of the strongest markets, fell the hardest. As their currency plummeted, there was high unemployment, mass bankruptcy. It was a disaster. President Suharto decided to cut back on all subsidies, which included basic things like fuel, transport and food. The people aren't very wealthy, and basically they couldn't even afford to buy basic stuff, and as they do in these sort of countries, they riot.
So we've heard that President Suharto is willing to stand down. Is that likely?
Well, he's 76 years old now, and he came to power 32 years ago, ironically, during a series of riots. He says he'll stand down, but there is no effective opposition to him. He's wiped it out. If he should go or he's ousted, we think it will come from inside, probably from someone from the army.
And are there any likely replacements?
Again, no name's been mentioned, but Colonel Timur, who we just saw earlier, is quite a likely candidate.
OK, thank you, Tony.
President Clinton has paid tribute to the bravery of US and Allied pilots on the 50th anniversary of the Berlin airlift. Hundreds of veterans gathered at the Tempelhof airport to commemorate one of history's greatest humanitarian air rescues. With Chancellor Kohl alongside him, Clinton led the celebrations. Tempelhof Airport in the heart of Berlin was the main operating base for the 15-month airlifts that began in June 1948. The Soviets had blocked all transport in or out of West Berlin, so the Allies flew in emergency aid and medicine in what became known as the Berlin airlifts. At its peak, there was nearly one plane every 90 seconds.
But the most precious cargo did not come in the well-named care packages. It was instead the hope created by the constant roar of the planes overhead. Berliners called this noise a symphony of freedom, reminding you that Berlin was not alone and that freedom was no flight of imagination.
And there was still time for a little good old-fashioned Cold War rhetoric.
If the communists could fight with fear, then we would fight back with friendship and faith.
38 Britons and 1 American lost their lives in the airlift. Chancellor Kohl thanked the veterans, saying that Berlin owed its very survival and freedom to their sacrifices. President Clinton will be leaving Berlin today and will be in Birmingham this weekend for the G8 summit.
Violence erupted today when Palestinians gathered in the West Bank, Gaza Strip and other Palestinian areas to mark the Nakba, the Palestinian exiling when Israel was formed in 1948. Sirens signalled for silence as thousands of Palestinians gathered in the streets to mark 50 years since Israel was formed, and Palestine felt itself dispossessed when they lost their lands. But the display did not last. Frustrated Palestinians started throwing stones at Israeli settlements, and before long a confrontation broke out with Israeli troops. One man was shot in the leg as troops opened fire to disperse the crowds. This man, being carried off, was shot dead, and dozens of others were injured. The rioting spread throughout all Palestinian areas, but most of the violence was in the Gaza Strip.
The Prime Minister is visiting Northern Ireland later today. He'll be drumming up support among reluctant unionists for a yes vote in next Friday's peace deal referendum.
Tony Blair faces a tough challenge today as he tries to persuade wavering unionist voters to back the peace deal in next Friday's referendum. Opinion polls reveal that 40% of unionists may not vote yes unless an acceptable resolution is found on the decommissioning of illegal weapons and the early release of paramilitary prisoners. Together with the growing unionist no vote, this may render the peace deal unworkable. In a broadcast tonight, Tony Blair will do his best to allay unionist fears.
Our Northern Ireland correspondent now joins us from Belfast. Peter, why is the Prime Minister going to Northern Ireland now?
Well, the government is obviously extremely concerned by the growing no vote and, more worryingly, the result of the recent opinion poll. As I said in my piece, if the wavering 40% vote no, along with the increasing no vote being championed by Ian Paisley's Democratic Unionist Party, all three parts of the agreement could be rendered unworkable. And this obviously is starkly in contrast with the overwhelming support for a yes vote among the Catholic parties.
So what are the Prime Minister's chances of success?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. In order to succeed, the Prime Minister must convince the unionist population that the decommissioning of illegal weapons in the hands of the IRA will take place before Sinn Féin representatives join the provincial parliament, which is a central part of the agreement. Now, this is precisely what the unionists refer to when they say weapons under the table. The exact details of the early release of both loyalist and nationalist paramilitary prisoners on both sides of the border remain an issue for both governments to thrash out.
OK, and where is Tony Blair now?
Well, security here in Belfast is very tight. Precise details of the Prime Minister's movements are strictly embargoed. However, if we can, we're going to try and bring you his walkabout live, and you know, we're hoping that it's going to be a little bit easier for him than the last time he went for a walkabout in central Belfast.
OK, thanks, Peter, very much.
International affairs may be occupying President Clinton's mind, but for many Americans, tonight's big story will be the passing of a TV institution. Not since the final episode of MASH in 1983 has America been so gripped by the demise of a television sitcom. More than 80 million viewers are expected to tune in this evening for the last ever episode of Seinfeld. The show about nothing has been a permanent fixture in the US ratings top 10 throughout the 1990s. And some viewers are planning farewell parties to mark the passing of their favourite programme. One group of people not sorry to see the final episode will be the producers. Companies such as Gardenberger and Fujifilm will pay around £1 million for a 30-second commercial during the show. and NBC are expected to rake in £25 million for the 105-minute special. But industry analysts say this price is a one-off.
I don't think it means much for the general world because there is only one Seinfeld. He's been on a long time. He's had a very strong and loyal following, particularly among young adults, which is a key audience for advertisers, and he only goes off the air once.
But for those mourning the loss of Seinfeld, there is a crumb of comfort. NBC have already sold the series for repeats, and with those sales expected to rake in over £600 million, it's clear who is having the last laugh.
Well, that last episode of Seinfeld is threatening to overshadow an important sale of impressionist and modern art at Sotheby's in New York. However, the auctioneers have little to worry about as the bidding at yesterday's sale produced record prices. As impressionist and modern art went under the hammer in Sotheby's yesterday, it became apparent that there was keen interest in the genre. Le Grand Canal, painted by Claude Monet on his first trip to Venetian 1908, fetched the evening's highest price of $12.1 million. Edgar Degas' nude Après la Bien sold for $6.6 million. This silver Titien Monsieur Turenne, made between 1735 and 1740 in Paris by Juste Auriel and described by Sotheby's as the most exciting piece of silver Western decorative art, sold for $5.7 million, making it the second highest price at auction for silver. These prices break the record at the peak of the market in 1989. 2 more sales are scheduled for today.
The United States is to send special envoys to Pakistan to try to defuse mounting tension following India's nuclear weapons tests. They aim to persuade the government not to follow India's example. But speaking in Geneva today, Disarmament Minister Munir Akram said Pakistan could not ignore what he called this grave threat to security. After 5 tests in 3 days, Pakistan is expressing widespread condemnation of India's actions. There is anger that criticism of India has not been strong enough and that the country could be responsible for starting an Asian arms race.
The leadership, as I said, seems to have gone berserk in India, and it is drawing Pakistan and has drawn Pakistan into a headlong arms race.
Defence Cabinet has said that it will not bow to pressure and that it must take all appropriate measures to protect itself. India's actions have enraged countries across the world. In Japan, protests were held outside the Indian embassy. Japan has already frozen grant aid to India, and Prime Minister Hashimoto is calling for further action by G8 member nations. But India is still in celebratory mood and appears to be unperturbed about the imposition of sanctions.
We are in touch with those countries. We are explaining our position, and I see no reason for any great concern at this stage.
If diplomats are to be successful in calling for restraint from Pakistan, they must first convince its people that India is being reprimanded.
Chelsea's footballers arrived back in London this morning after last night's victory. They beat Stuttgart 1-0 in Stockholm to take the European Cup Winners' Cup. The celebrations followed. Even the builders at Heathrow stopped work to welcome back the tired but victorious team. And Chelsea's captain took the opportunity to show off his medal.
It's pushed us up higher, which is nice, and hopefully we can do better next year. Okay, cheers, chaps.
The Prime Minister has sent his congratulations to the club. Everyone was pleased with their performance.
We're happy with this season's progress, and we'll start focusing on next season when we come back in July.
The winning goal was scored by Gianfranco Zola, who was brought on as a substitute 20 minutes before the end of the match. 13,000 fans travelled to Stockholm. Police reported only 6 arrests. Some well-known Chelsea supporters expressed their delight at the success of the team and their fans.
I think it was, a very happy occasion. As far as I know, there wasn't any trouble. Certainly we haven't had any reported. Very good.
Well, of course they behaved well. I mean, what would you expect them to do? I mean, everyone saying, what about the trouble that might be? I mean, the fact is that we go there to enjoy ourselves. We've had a great time. We've come back with a cup.
It seems there's universal agreement. It was a great night for Chelsea and British football.
Tonight's main stories again. After 20 deaths during 3 days of rioting, President Suharto has flown back to Indonesia amid calls for his resignation.
And 50 years on, President Clinton and Chancellor Kohl remember the Berlin airlift. The next news is at 6 on BBC One, but from all of us here on the 3 o'clock team, good afternoon.